And with that, let's get started here. So I'm going to turn it over to Janelle Julian from Fontbonne University, who will introduce our panelists and our topic for us tonight. Thank you again for joining us from the Association of Colleges of the Sisters of St. Joseph. I'm Martha Malinsky. I'm the Executive Director of the association, and excited to be with you and excited to offer this webinar series, Leading in the Footsteps of Our Founders, and it's generously supported by the C. Charles Jackson Foundation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Janelle.
Great, thanks, Martha. As Martha said, my name is Janelle Julian. I'm the Assistant Vice President here at Fontbonne University. First, I do want to say thank you for your flexibility. We were hoping to be able to bring some folks to campus to participate in this panel, but grateful that we have wonderful technology to do this virtually in the bad weather. So for tonight, I am really excited to offer a panel perspective from three wonderful women about how they find balance in their lives, how they serve their communities, both professionally and personally, and to offer their perspective on their successes and challenges that align with that. Just so you all have a little bit of an understanding of our structure for the evening, our plan is to allow for a brief introduction from each of the panelists. So I'll actually let them introduce themselves and a little bit about their experiences. And then after that, we are going to transition to a question and answer period. And Martha, I might need a little bit of your help to guide our participants on how to do that, depending on how they're in the Zoom webinar or wherever. And I also have some questions too that a couple of our students here at Fontbonne wrote out for us in preparation for this panel. So we will transition to some of those if there's time as well. So like I said, I'll turn it over to our panelists to kind of give a brief introduction about who they are and their journey. So we'll go alphabetically. So I think that means Meredith, you get to go first.
Called it. All right, pressure's on. Well, hello everyone. My name is Meredith Amalati. I am a senior here at Fontbonne studying special elementary education, born and raised in St. Louis. My journey began way back when. My mom loves the CSJ. She attended Fontbonne herself. And then my first true experience with was at St. Joseph's Academy for high school, where I owe a lot of my abilities and skill set to them because they really built the foundation for me as a woman leader. They really promoted that values-driven woman leader and serving the dear neighbor without distinction, all that really set me up for success here at Fontbonne. So that's a little bit about me.
Great, thank you, Meredith. I appreciate that. Sister Amy, would you want to do an introduction now, please?
Okay, so I'm Sister Amy Hereford, born and raised in St. Louis, and I've lived in many different places, but I'm happy to be back in St. Louis. I guess for the past about 20 years, I've been working as a lawyer, a civil lawyer, and a canon lawyer. I primarily work with religious communities. And so I think, you know, as far as being a part of a religious community, it's been, I think, a group of really highly qualified, well-educated women who are extremely committed to mission, and working together with this group of people just has, I think, enhanced my own leadership possibilities and skills. And, you know, it's a continual challenge as well as continual support through the various ups and downs of life. So it's been a real blessing.
Great, thank you. And then Kristen Norwood, please.
Hi, I'm Kristen Norwood. I am originally from a place called Texarkana, Texas. If you've ever heard of it, I'd be surprised. I've been in St. Louis for, I believe, 7 years now. I'm currently a learning and development specialist at a large financial services firm. But prior to the last, I guess, year and a half or so, I was a professor of communication studies, most recently at Fontbonne University, which is how I know Janelle. So I'm familiar with the wonderful work of the Sisters of St. Joseph. And my connection to this topic is twofold. I had a special research interest in women's issues and just gender in general when I was in academia, and I did some research on women who combine work and motherhood. And then, of course, personally, I am a woman who works full time, and about 22 months ago had my first child. So I have a personal connection to finding balance and leading in professional and personal realms. And one note, I'm probably going to have to very soon here just be on audio because my phone is drained of battery and I have no charger. But I have a different phone that I'm going to join via audio.
Great, perfect. Thanks, Kristen. All right, I think I'll ask maybe just one question to get us started, and then as our participants are joining or listening, if you have any questions, Martha, can they type those in somewhere? Or
Yes, so our attendees that are participating via Zoom, you can chat, put in your questions into the Q&A section if you're joining us by computer. And we're also streaming live on Facebook, and so they can also write their questions in there as well.
Great, thank you. I think the first question I would ask each of you as a panelist would be, from your perspective, how has the role of women changed in society over time, and how maybe have you been impacted by those changes? When I first thought about this webinar, that question was really what drove me to bring this topic to conversation. And so I'd love to hear just your initial thoughts on that. How do you think the role of women has changed, and how have you maybe personally been impacted by that? I think we maybe temporarily lost Kristen, so.
Well, I've had a lot of history. I think, well, when I went to law school, it was about 50-50 men and women in the 90s. I think there was also kind of an assumption that the women would be there for a while and then probably step out of their careers, have a family, and come back. And so I think there's a kind of an assumption that, I mean, you can have both, but then how do you balance them? My other area is canon law. And so this is church law. And all of the upper level are clerics. Okay, so it's men, priests, bishops, etc. So I mean, there are no women in the really leadership roles in canon law, and it's to me it's bizarre, even though for them it's the normal world. Women, I think, do a lot of work, kind of the groundwork, but it's the guys who kind of have all the authority. So it's two different legal systems, two very different types of gender roles. I think one of my early experiences in law school was of a negotiation where we broke up into groups. We had different negotiation, tasks through the course. And one that always stuck in my mind was, it was the last one we did. There were 7 parties to the negotiation. And in my group, I think we were 6 women and 1 man. All the other groups were mostly men. We were the only group that solved, that came to any kind of an agreement. Not only that, we were friends at the end. Whereas that multi-interest, balancing many different issues, just that kind of taught me that's one of the things women do really, really well. That's one of the reasons I think we can balance career and home life, or for me, religious life, is because we tend to naturally handle a variety of different interests, different layers of interest in a project. But yeah, I would say, you know, when I was probably around, I don't remember it specifically, when the first woman congressman came in. But in religious life, like all of the early presidents of Fontbonne were women, sisters. So being part of a movement that has had a lot of women's leadership makes me step into the world where that's not true in a kind of a like quizzical way, like, you mean we can't do this? So I would say there's certainly changes over the years.
Meredith, do you want to offer a perspective on that?
I was going to say, I definitely agree with that. I think about my time, I'm going to keep going back to St. Joe because I think that's the biggest impact I've had so far. But even since graduating from St. Joe, they've really been pushing girls to go for like STEM careers. I don't really know how to explain it, but 99% of them are in STEM classes. And to think when I was in grade school, even then it was picking up that women were going to go towards these usually male-dominated fields. But now they're just really working towards pushing us in a direction of, hey, you are able to do all these different things. I mean, I'm going into a field dominated by females, but that's not to say that we're not capable. So all these different, they're giving us opportunities now than ever before, really. You know, they're finally saying, yes, you can do this, instead of, no, that's a boy's job, or no, this is your spot, you need to stay here. They're finally giving us opportunities to move forward.
Great, thanks, Meredith. Kristen, are you still with us, at least by audio?
I am with you, but I did miss a question, so if you could repeat it, that would be great.
Sure. We're talking about excuse me, your perspective of how women have changed.
How women have changed? Is that what you said?
Yeah, she's losing. How women's role in society has changed over your career or your lifetime. I'm just jumping in because Janelle seems to be having trouble.
Thank you. Yeah. So my perspective on this is I did come in kind of the middle of the first answer, so I'll add a sort of blend of both of the answers that I heard to say that I think that the challenge used to be that, you know, women were somewhat discounted for professional work outside the home. And the challenge was to be considered just as valid, just as capable as men. And I think we've made a lot of progress in that respect. And I'm not saying that there aren't still challenges in the workplace for women. There absolutely are, and I've certainly experienced those myself. But I think now on a global scale, now that women have really achieved, you know, the inroads in becoming professionals and working outside the home, you know, nearly equal to men, the challenge now for women is having it all, which is really, really difficult. So now a lot of us are working full-time outside of the home, and we still haven't relinquished much of the responsibility inside the home. So I think that that's currently probably the biggest focus, at least for me personally, and it was in some of my research as well, to understand how to do that well.
Great. Thanks, Kristen. I think Janelle is still offline.
Yeah, kind of. I think I lost my camera as well, so I apologize.
Sorry about that.
Fighting a cold over here, apparently. So thank you all for offering those perspectives. I really appreciate that. I can't see if we've had any questions at this point from the
there's no questions from the audience yet. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Not a problem, because I've got lots of them already here. So one of the things that, and maybe Sister Amy, you could share this, but I think Meredith and Kristen, you have a great perspective on this as well, which is, how do you believe the Sisters of St. Joseph have paved the way in promoting women's leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I think Meredith has certainly talked about how it impacted her, you know, even as men and women both, I think, in school. But I think modeling leadership, you know, some of the first PhDs in many fields were sisters, maybe not Sisters of St. Joseph, but, you know, sisters from various communities. So because we got out there and didn't take no for an answer, being in a religious community, I think, gave us the opportunity to get really good educations and good support. And then as we took on leadership roles in our hospitals, in our schools, in our universities, I think it really gave, just modeled women's leadership in a world in which, had we not been sisters, it would not have been possible. And, you know, taking that up, you know, continuing, I think, to focus on, I mean, one of the things that I question for myself is how many, you know, Sisters of St. Joseph and other communities established, you know, high schools, academies, universities, and these were women-led for most of their history. And increasingly now we've got, you know, male presidents and board chairs and all. And I would really love to see us get back to, you know, it's not the sisters now, but lay women becoming more and more into those roles in leadership, educational leadership, as well as administration in many of these entities. So let's keep going.
Great. Meredith or Kristen, do you have anything to offer with that?
I was just going to say that there are high expectations, and they've really strived to take the attention away from just ourselves and to really spread attention and awareness to everybody around us and what their needs might be and how we could problem solve and help those around us. And I think that's a really important leadership skill, is that it's not always about me, myself, and I. It's about those who surround us and help us, and how it's a give and take relationship.
Yep, and I would just echo what Sister Amy said, that the history of education, and higher education in particular, I think is really a difference maker, that the sisters were establishing schools. I think that's a really important part of modeling and cultivating women's leadership.
Great, thank you. Looks like we have a question from the audience, so I will ask that, which is, as women leaders, we help those around us no matter who they are. So my question is, what motivates you to be mentors to others, specifically women?
Well, I know from my end, I'm, along with Janelle, student coordinator for a group here on campus called Women Mentoring Women. And it's a 3-phase program that the girls on campus work through if they so do decide. And they learn more about themselves as individuals, as leaders, and future professionals. And one of the aspects in phase 2 and 3 is that in phase 2, they're paired with a mentor. And then in phase 3, they become the mentor. And I just love this structure because you learn from those who you can relate to, but you also learn from those who've had experiences. So the program really does a nice job of pairing them with who they're comfortable with, but also with those who have worked in their field that they're pursuing, or have had similar goals, or are going down a similar path, and they really look up to these women that they're being mentored by. And then on the flip side, they get to take everything they've learned and share that with the younger girls, the younger generations. If you take it off of campus, if you want to take it to the schools, or to just, you know, a young cousin that you're really close to, you get to teach them, because we're all teachers. And so kind of you guide them and you're role models for them, and they have that positive person to look to and learn from and see the mistakes and make their own mistakes and have somebody there to support them.
Thanks, Meredith. Sister Amy or Kristen, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. I think what motivates me is, first of all, I'm just somebody who's always keen on relationships, and so I think I just have a natural inclination towards mentoring. But also, I think that, you know, when I see potential in a woman, it makes me, I've always cared about women's issues and women's leadership, and I don't want to see any woman underestimate herself, sell herself short. And I, in particular, I kind of wish that I would have had someone who was mentoring me at a younger age than when I had my first, you know, I would say real mentor. I mean, my mom mentored me in some ways for sure, but I do wish there had been a presence that was looking, you know, over my shoulder saying, hey, that's maybe not the best thing, or why don't you think of it this way, or think about what's important to you. I wish I had had that presence, and so I really enjoy playing that role for others.
Yeah, and sometimes when I think about, I'm just thinking about I was invited to do a day-and-a-half workshop, and I was thinking of who I wanted to help me out with this, and my immediate thought was, I'm sorry to say, some guys who were kind of more my peers, and I said, you know, this would be a great opportunity to identify some newer people in the field, newer women in the field, and reach out to them and give them this opportunity. They can do a fine job, but just they're not the first people you think about. So I think even, you know, even those of us who are, you know, professional women, sometimes we've got to also challenge ourselves to think about, wait a second, I can offer this to anybody, but can I just particularly look for women who are, you know, just waiting for that opportunity, or maybe don't see themselves in that role, but if I invite them in, they could excel, because, you know, people brought me along, so it's kind of like pay it forward, bring along the next generation.
Great, thank you all. Next question I have is, how have you found in your own life your ability to find balance? What are some of the things that you've done to find balance between your home life and your professional life? And perhaps maybe if you're willing to be or to disclose a little more, what maybe have you had to sacrifice along the way?
I'm thinking.
yeah, that's a tough question.
I'm thinking, do I have balance? So I'll just go ahead and start. No, it's fine. So I will say I changed careers about a year and a half ago, and it really did kind of coincide with becoming a parent. Almost, you know, there was like a 6 month window when I was in my old career as a professor with a child. But I will say that I have always been a workaholic. I say now I'm a recovering workaholic, because once I had my baby, I was determined I was going to have better work-life balance. And to be honest, there was just no other option. I had to. You know, when Janelle and I had our first babies very, very close together, so I know we shared this experience, but when you have that responsibility at home, you can't work all night and all weekend like you used to. So in that sense, it came because it was a necessity for me. But I also, in changing careers, I was really open with my current manager when I was interviewing about, you know, the desire for work-life balance. And I tried really hard to communicate that I would be very much a dedicated employee, but not at the expense of parenting. So I started with really clear expectations there, and I've been very, very, very lucky that I have a manager who's very protective of her employees' work-life balance. So I know that I'm lucky in that sense that not everyone has that in their life. So that's made it very doable for me. I also lean very heavily on my partner, my husband. He's really stepped up and done a lot for me, or for us as a family. So that's been a big part of it. And I will say, you asked about challenges too. I have an internal struggle a lot of times because I would say I'm a fairly ambitious person, and there are times that I do believe that I'm probably forfeiting some opportunities to show myself to be, leadership potential, or to show myself as someone who would be really, really valuable in my current organization, because I won't, for example, stay late, or I work from home one day a week. So I do struggle with this, am I creating the perception that I'm not dedicated by trying to have work-life balance? And I've even said the words to people, they've asked me, would you want to be in a leadership position in this organization? And I have said, I don't think right now is the right time for me, just in my personal life, but someday. So you may find yourself in the position of having to make choices like that. And I know there are plenty of women who are in leadership positions who have family responsibilities. So I'm not saying you can't do it, you certainly can. But for me, that's been something I've thought about a lot lately, and it's just a challenge for me personally.
Thanks, Kristen. You speak my language a lot in that.
Yeah, my life is a little different. It's community responsibility, and I certainly have a great deal of admiration for women who are raising kids, and just the massive responsibility and commitment that is. For me, it's our community and different aspects of the life of the community, and taking on roles within the community, as well as, the professional side. I realize it's a very different kind of balance, but I do think it's critical to be intentional about it. There are, and I think particularly with sisters, there are certain worlds in which people assume because you don't have a family that you can take on, 50 and 60 and 70 hours, extra time. And I think, there's a balance between, generosity and commitment, but also having, my community responsibilities, but also it's not just giving to others. There's also needs to be time for yourself, for personal growth, for, taking care of yourself personally, spiritually, emotionally. But I think for me, it's being intentional about it. And it's not always easy to say no to an opportunity, especially like a really good professional opportunity. But sometimes I feel like I've got to do that. But it's that intentionality around it that for me is important.
Great, thank you very much. Sister Amy, we have a question specifically for you, which from the audience, which says, the Sisters of St. Joseph have been revolutionary through history in terms of women's leadership. Can you speak about what really drew you to become a SSJ and how that had shaped your own leadership?
I think as a just out of college, I don't think I was thinking women's leadership. It was more of a God thing. I think that's been something. I mean, as far as women's leadership, I've become much more conscious of it over time. My undergrad was science, so now would be STEM, but at the time, women were very underrepresented. And so I grew up in a family with mostly boys, and then went into science with, largely male dominated, and then entered a community of all women. So it was a real shift for me But I think it's something I've really grown to appreciate over time. I don't think it's what drew me to the community, but I think it's something I've certainly come to appreciate. So many different women who've given their lives to the dear neighbor in so many different ways. We have everything from kindergarten teachers who've been kindergarten teachers for a whole lifetime, to women who've run hospitals and hospital systems or universities, and I think that's really something that's really grown on me, to be a leader not as a solo person but as one of a community of brilliant women. It's really been a gift.
Great, thank you very much. The next question, I will ask it, and I think maybe it's geared towards me to respond, but certainly anybody else could offer some insight. The question says, working on a college campus founded by the Sisters of St. Joseph, how has learning about the charism impacted your work and your own understanding of women's leadership? I will say I grew up in an environment where I grew up Catholic, and my father and mother both worked at a Jesuit high school. And so my understanding of Catholicism and just being a leader was very much founded in the ideals of the Jesuits. And I attended a Jesuit institution for my degrees. And so that was always really part of who I've been, my understanding of what leadership looks like and how I serve others. And so when I transitioned to Fontbonne now 8 years ago, really the charism of the sisters is not far from the ideals and the values of the Jesuits. And so that didn't feel like a great leap for me, but it was really empowering to think about an institution that was founded by women. Outside of my Jesuit education, I think I've always been raised to be a strong woman and a strong woman leader. And so to be at an institution that was founded by women, leading a university, finding a university, and growing it to what it is today is actually really inspiring. And so that's probably the biggest piece for me, is being in a situation and working at an institution that I am consistently inspired by our history and the women that have been a part of that. Anybody else want to jump in on the thought of that? Meredith, maybe from your perspective as a student on a CSJ campus or the Sisters of St. Joseph campus?
Sure. Well, it was just a smooth transition from high school to here. It felt like a second home, just because the ideals and values are seen everywhere. I mean, we have the mission statement posted, and we have all the service opportunities, but also just, once again, in the expectations of how we go about respecting each other and including everyone and making sure each person's needs are met. And, I can't go anywhere on this campus, which I love, the fact that I will always get a smile or a wave or a hello, how's your day going? And I may know the person or I may not, but I'm always interacting. And I see the sisters through that. Just the cordiality and everything. I learned from that, and I mirrored those actions. I actually had a teacher here that said that she doesn't walk down the hallway without saying anything. Like, she will walk down the hallway, and if she passes 5 people, she will strike up a conversation with all 5, even if it's just a hello, how are you? I hope you have a good day. And that comes off as, a real professional move as well, but also as you're showing that person that you see them and that you truly do hope that their day either becomes better now that you've acknowledged them, or that they do just have a nice day. And so I was taught that at St. Joe. Upon graduation, I was told that I would know how to give a firm handshake and make direct eye contact. And I walked across that stage with a direct handshake and, a firm handshake and direct eye contact. So those expectations and building you up to make you a strong person, a strong woman, and a strong leader are still here on campus. And it's nice to have the values that I've held dear to my heart that my parents have instilled in me be shown throughout multiple ways on this campus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is Kristen. I'll just add, I did not grow up Catholic, and really in the area that I'm from, there's not a lot of Catholics at all. So I didn't know how it would feel to work at a Catholic school, and I wasn't familiar with the Sisters of St. Joseph before I learned about Fontbonne, and I will just say that I felt so completely at home there. And the first time that I heard in detail the history of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet was at the Catch the Fire ceremony, which is a ceremony that happens in the fall, early fall, beginning of the school year each year. And I was in tears and wholly inspired by it. And every single year after that, I could never keep from crying at just the stories of the history and the challenges and that they endured and the sacrifices that they made. And so I definitely felt that spirit when I was there, embraced it fully despite not being Catholic.
Great, thank you. We have another question from the audience, which is, can you explain more about how you integrate spirituality into your leadership?
I can take a stab at that. First of all, prayer's a part of my life. So prayer, the community here, we pray every morning together, and then we have different times when we pray individually. I usually pray before we get together as a group, and then anytime we have a meeting with the Sisters of St. Joseph, we'll always have prayer incorporated into the meeting. So it's just it's kind of the part of the fabric of my life. I think when I'm facing challenges, that's a place to go to spirituality, to go to prayer, and just let I sit with it is what I usually say. You know, whether it's a problem with a client or with a community I'm working with, to really hold them in prayer and hold myself or my relationship, if it's a challenging relationship, in prayer. I mean, I think it's there's the spiritual element, but I think it's also being a more reflective person, trying to maybe in the situation I've reacted, but then reflecting on that and what values I'm living out of. So I think being a person of prayer and then stepping into any role really, but certainly leadership, I think that's going to impact that.
To follow along with that, my dad is a deacon at my home parish, and so going to Mass with the whole family was a big thing in my family, and connecting it to you was the reflection piece, is that he taught my brother and I how to reflect on our actions. And I still keep that very close to the front of my mind, especially as a future educator. You have to reflect on everything to make sure that everything is going well. But really, it's just when you're making it comes down to reflection and choice, because when you're making a choice, you have to reflect on, well, how is this going to impact me? How's it going to impact the person that's going to be receiving this action? And that's how I manage everything right now is, do I want to pass up an opportunity to spend time with my parents right now? Or do I really want to go out and see another movie with my friends? And then I have to reflect about, well, what's the impact for both parties? And I know since last semester, when I had one of my larger practicums for education, I had to make priorities. And so I found myself reflecting a lot of what's important to me and what do I value most right now. Freshman, sophomore year, I was like, oh yeah, friends all the way. Like, schoolwork was priority, but my family will be there. And so I don't know what reminded me of how I needed to start reflecting again. And also during that time, I did, without having mom and dad there with me to go to Mass every single weekend, I started to slow down on that too. And so I'm currently working with my relationship with my spirituality. And it's getting there because, once again, it's a choice, and you have to reflect on if you can stand beside your choice. and how that's going to help you be a better leader is through that reflection.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly add, for me, it's very much just about making sure that my personal values are lived out in my professional life as well. So the things that are important to me, spiritually in my personal life, things like, justice and generosity and respect and kindness, just making sure that there's no separation in terms of how I am behaving and orienting towards other people in my professional life and my personal life.
Great, thank you all. Another question from our participants, which I'm really interested to hear the answer to this, which is, how do we integrate men into becoming actively involved in understanding the complexities of women leadership in a contemporary world? And how do we get men involved to advocate for a change in social structures that prevent women's advancement in our society?
Mm. If only we had the answer to that question, or those questions. So I think that there's a lot of answers to this question, so I'm just going to attempt one fraction of one, and that is to say, I think one way that we can do it as individuals, if you're not working in a capacity where you can kind of impact things on a larger scale, I think through personal relationships. I think that is one really impactful way that you can work towards this goal on behalf of society, is through individual relationships. So talk to the men in your lives that you trust, and tell them your perspective, tell them your fears, tell them your challenges, your anxieties, your triumphs. Help them to see things from your perspective. I think sometimes the men in my life have just been surprised to know that I've had the experiences that I've had, or that I feel the way that I do. And so when you can relate to them in that way, what you've experienced, what you think and believe in and want and value and fear, then I think that helps men as individuals come along and want to be supportive in ways that maybe they haven't been before. And, one at a time is one way to go about it. It's not the only way, but that's one idea that I have.
I was going to say, educate them. I mean, that's how we all learn, and that's how we all realize that there needs to be a change of some sort. And so I think there's a fear of bringing up this type of topic with the guys, because it's like if they really cared, they would have already done it, kind of thing. Or like, oh, what if they think I'm just being like a silly, over analyzing every little aspect? But I mean, nothing's going to change unless you tell them and you educate them and you work together and have an actual dialogue about it.
Yeah. And in that dialogue, it's helpful to make sure that the men you're talking to understand that it's not necessarily at their expense that things, need to change, and helping them see it differently so that they're not defensive about it. Right. And that is very challenging with some men. I understand that. I've faced that myself, but it's worth a shot.
Yeah. And I was also thinking, it's I've gotten, especially with this last year and a half, more involved with the Black Lives Matter movement. So this is an area where kind of I'm part of the dominant white culture, and deconstructing, I'm aware, but there's a lot of choices that I make daily that impact part of the community in ways that I never intended. So kind of helping to deconstruct that in myself, and talking, in the community and participating in rallies, I think has made me aware of how unaware I am, and consequently how unaware guys probably are most of the time. This is just the world they live in. But continuing to speak our truth with authenticity, and like you said, with compassion, and knowing when to speak, and when I need to speak for myself, and when I need to speak for the other, and when it's just not going to help.
Yeah.
But continuing to stand up and stand with women. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Kristen, were you going to add something to that?
Well, this might be a little bit of a tangent, but I was just thinking that when I used to teach gender classes, and there were men in those classes, one of the things that I always tried really hard to do was, in addition to making them understand that it's not, that just trying to dispel myths like feminists or man haters and things like that. Another thing that I made sure to do is tell them that gender is relevant to them as well. So, your example, Sister Amy, about being involved in the Black Lives Matter movement, it's not just something that Black people should care about or be involved in. And a lot of times white people, we just don't think that race is relevant to us, right? Because we're the default race, the sort of dominant default race. And gender works the same way. A lot of times men don't think gender issues are relevant to them because they're sort of the, it's a weird way to say it, but dominant default gender, meaning that women are the ones, who deal with gender issues. But I would try to get them to see that they are both privileged and oppressed by gender expectations as well. And that, I think, sometimes went a long way when I'm thinking of a student in particular. I'm not going to name him, but I think we talked about him being surprised when he saw my course syllabus for the gender, that, we were talking about men a lot and the way that gender impacts men's lives and in various ways, expectations of being breadwinners and not being emotional and so on and so forth. And I think that really helped to soften him in terms of having conversations about women's issues, because he found it, he finally saw that it was relevant to him as well.
Great, thank you so much. I saw a lot of head nodding on our videos here, which is great. I am catching up on our questions here. Next one I have is, what does the future look like for women's leadership?
I'm gonna quote one of my heroes, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Somebody asked her, when will there be enough women on the Supreme Court? And she said, when there's 9. I do think there's always a problem with trying to say like women are different than, we are different from men, but it's also, you don't want to create a dualism like women do this and men do that. We share a common humanity, and we also bring some distinctive insights, distinctive way of being in the world. Honestly, for me, being very active in the church, now I've primarily been active with women's religious communities, so it's an area of the church where women are very much in the forefront. But I think to see more women's leadership in the church would be just we have to move in that direction, and I think we have to. We have now the German Chancellor and the British Prime Minister, both women. We've got women in leadership roles that just would have been unthinkable even 50 years ago. So certainly there's a lot of progress been made, and I think it's increasingly becoming, I want to say, normalized. And yet that doesn't mean there aren't boundaries. And so to really help, as you say, both men and women, to help people to continue to do the best they can for their own life and for, contributing to society, contributing all they can to society, to their families, to their communities. And I think we have a long way to go, but I also, you don't have to roll back very far to see how far we've already come. we just had the election, how many women were elected. And, I always am impressed with the people referring to women having the vote. And, it just wasn't that long ago that wasn't the case. So a long way to go, but I think, I think we've made amazing progress.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts on that question?
I would just like to add that as we start educating younger and younger girls, I think, and boys as well, that we will see even more progress. I think the future is bright for both. And moving forward, we might see more walking together instead of, well, we need to get where he is or we need to get where she is. It'll be more, let's walk to there together, and let's keep providing opportunities for both. And I think at least the education system, special place in my heart with my major, but is getting there with offering robotics teams and all these different opportunities to get hands-on experiences with potential careers. And it doesn't have to be STEM related. They bring in all different careers. So they're really trying to push for the younger grades to get involved and to have exposure. And with that, I think we'll see a strong impact as they grow older and continue their education and continue pursuing their dream careers.
Yeah, and I'll just add, kind of from a theoretical and experiential point of view, in the research that, when women's research on women in the workforce and in terms of gender issues really got going, there was a big focus on something called role conflict. So the idea that when people think of the term professional or when people think of leader, they would automatically picture a man and also think about masculine characteristics as, the person who would qualify as a professional or a leader would have masculine characteristics such as, assertiveness. They'd have a linear career path, not quote unquote derailed by family or other obligations. They'd be, super dedicated employee who doesn't care about anything but work. So all these sorts of stereotypical, you might say, masculine traits. And I think historically, women in leadership have had to make choices sometimes maybe to behave like men. And I wish you could see me because I'm doing air quotes around men, because I'm not saying that all men behave that way, but it's a sort of society's idea of what a masculine person or a man should be like. So that assertiveness, things like that. And so I think in the past that women have felt pressured to, if they wanted to be professionals, if they particularly wanted to be leaders, they had to take on those kinds of stereotypically masculine attributes. So I think that the future of women's leadership is, I'm hoping it will, and I think it will look different than that, in that women in leadership positions are going to be able to just be themselves, whether they tend to have more traditionally masculine or traditionally feminine, or maybe just androgynous personality characteristics and behaviors, communication styles. I think that by inhabiting more and more leadership positions and more professional positions, that women are actually going to change what leadership means. And I think they're going to change it for women and for men. I think you're going to see men who are in leadership positions that don't necessarily have to, feel the pressure to have those traditionally masculine characteristics.
Thank you. We are actually about at our time, and so I wanted to just kind of open the floor, if you will, for any final comments or remarks from our panelists before we wrap up.
I would just like to add, for when this gets shared or anyone watching now, I know through the last 4 years with my leadership involvement on campus, there have been quite a few moments of doubts, as in self-doubt and questioning if you are capable or if I'm capable and stuff. And I feel like that's kind of common, especially through the younger women leaders who might not have a lot of experience yet. And so I just want to share the message that you can and you will, whatever you put your sights on and whatever you're determined to do, you can do it and you will do it. And don't be afraid to make your voice heard. If you have an idea, share it. If you have a goal, go and achieve it. Everybody is fully capable of reaching that final outcome. So you will have those bumps in the road and you will have those self-doubts. And even though the moment might feel like it's the worst thing at all, looking back on it 3 years, 5 years, 4 months ago, that's where the reflection piece comes in. It's okay. You'll get over the bump. Do believe in yourself because you are destined for great things.
That's awesome. I will just add that think about leadership as a dynamic concept. You don't have to be in a formal position of authority to be a leader. And so I would say for women and for men, just lead in whatever kind of role you have. Lead personally, lead in your family, lead in your community, lead professionally if that suits you as well. But in leading, hold each other up, and particularly, women holding other women up, supporting other women, I think is a really important part of women's leadership.
Yeah, and I'm going to follow that, Kristen. The thing that jumps into mind right away when you said that was, particularly in my canon law side of my work, church law is I've come to read bibliographies with a gender lens. So really looking for things that are written by women, because there aren't as many, and kind of the traditional bibliography might not have them, but to then go out and look for that for articles, for books, etc. I had my Victorian women's period where I just started reading all Victorian women, just as for recreational reading, but really focusing on the women's voices, the women in movies, the women in popular media, finding those women's voices and like I say, I just found myself making that shift, which is a way of lifting up these voices, at least in my life and in my teaching and professional work.
Great. I think those are wonderful insights and inspirations to close on. So I just wanted to say thank you to Sister Amy, Meredith, and Kristen for your time. This was a quick hour, and I think we covered a lot of different areas regarding women and balance and women's role in society. And if we've achieved nothing else, I think we've achieved that this is a complex issue that honors us having further conversation. And so I hope everyone who's participating or who will listen moving forward, bring these conversations to light in the other areas of your life. Have a conversation with friends or your faculty members or your colleagues and talk about these issues and how we can continue to, I think, Sister Amy, you just said it, lift others up and lift other women up. So thank you all for your time tonight. I'm going to pass it to Martha to do, I think, a quick closing and wrap up as well.
Yeah, well, thank you to all of our panelists, Sister Amy, Meredith, and Kristen, and to Janelle Julian, who organized this panel. Appreciate all your work that went in behind the scenes, even before this webinar happened, to organize the panelists and the questions and content here today. So a big thank you to Fontbonne University for hosting this webinar. We at the Association of Colleges of the Sisters of St. Joseph hope that you found this webinar, like I did, very inspirational and gave me a lot to think about, and I hope it did you as well. So thank you for joining us, Leading with Purpose and Striving for Balance. The webinar is recorded and it'll be available on our website, ACSSJ.org. And before we leave, I also want to do a special thank you to Andrew Mercado, who's behind the scenes on this webinar and has been behind the scenes on this whole webinar series, acting as our coordinator and handling all of the organization for these webinars. So thank you to Andrew and his work with ACSSJ. So with that, good night, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank
Yeah.
you.